At the point that you went into the bedroom and observed the pajama pants on the bed, those pants had not been touched by anyone to that point, to your knowledge, is that correct?
That's correct.
When you observed those pants, they were not tied,
To my recollection, no, they were not.
but they did appear to have been cinched or pulled tight recently, isn't that correct?
Yes.
You were at the hospital when Chloe was pronounced deceased, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you observed that Kelsie was very distraught and hysterically crying.
Yes, that's correct.
So not just crying, you specifically note that she was hysterically crying.
Yes.
And she spent some time with the hospital chaplain prior to you going and meeting with her, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And we just reviewed the audio, but she was crying at the beginning portion of that conversation.
That I don't recall specifically.
You don't recall just hearing that at the beginning of that audio?
Her crying, or there's a lot of noise at the beginning. I don't specifically recall her at that point crying.
Her emotions at the beginning of the audio, she seemed to be upset, but as she continued to talk with you, she got a little more comfortable. Would you agree to that?
Yes, I would describe her as in a little bit of a state of disbelief still.
Her speaking with you was the first time that someone sat down with her and really spoke with her about what happened, is that correct?
That's correct.
But do you have any indication as to how many times she would have already somewhat relayed what happened to law enforcement?
To the best of my recollection, it would have been my initial contact with her at the house and then at the hospital.
So do you know whether or not she would have told the dispatcher on the 911 call what happened?
I don't know specifically what she said in the 911 call.
Okay. How about whether or not she talked with another officer or if another officer overheard her explaining what happened?
That I don't know.
How about medical personnel? Do you know if she told any medical personnel what happened?
I do not.
But you do know she at least spoke with you initially at the residence,
Yes.
and then again more formally at the hospital in the private room.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, throughout all of your interactions with Kelsie, there was nothing about her emotional reactions that stood out as odd or not normal to you.
That's correct.
You also just mentioned that you met with medical examiner Mr. Hagus, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that was at the conclusion, or at least after you met with Ms. Thomas?
Yes.
Did you relate to Mr. Hagus your findings? What information you had at that point?
I guess I don't think I relayed any specific informations or any specific information or conclusions to Haggist. I believe our conversation revolved mostly around Chloe's injuries or any additional findings that he may have made or observations that he may have made that I would want to note or also observe myself.
So essentially, though, the purpose of meeting with him was to share the information, whether it be you give information to him or him give information to you.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And were you aware that Chloe's death was initially considered an accident?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No, nothing, Your Honor.
You may step down. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may also be excused and leave the courtroom if you choose to do so. Members of the jury will stand up and take the judge's right. Seated. State may call next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would call
Chief Tom McAndrew to the stand.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is true and correct, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Have a seat in the witness chair.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Tom McAndrew.
And how are you currently employed?
I am employed by the City of Ottumwa.
In what capacity?
I am Chief of Police
How long have you served as chief of the Ottumwa Police Department?
since May of 2013.
Prior to that, how long did you serve as an officer or investigator or whatever other role?
I've been working for the police department for 32 years, since 1988.
Now, I want to direct your attention to July 19th, 2018. What were you at? Were you working that day?
Yes,
Do you remember receiving some type of call that led you to go on scene?
yes I do.
Is that normal for you to go to a scene as
No.
chief?
Not normally, only on major calls like this.
And what made this a particular major call from your recollection?
I just heard over the radio that there was a child hanging.
What did you do once you heard that?
I was actually at a meeting in City Hall, and I heard over the radio that there was a child hanging, and I immediately left, got into my squad car, and drove downtown. I had heard the address of James, so I knew I was headed for James Street.
When you arrived, could you describe the scene at least as best as you recall it?
When I pulled up to the residence, there was a fire truck there. Assistant Chief Corey Binge's truck was there. There was a police car there. And then at the same time, Officer Higgins and Officer Murphy were arriving on scene.
What did you proceed to do?
I exited my patrol car and I walked into the front living room of 127 James.
Do you remember anybody being in the living room when you walked in?
Yes, the first person I saw was Kelsie Thomas, and she was holding a small child.
Do you remember anything in particular about that interaction?
Kelsie was crying. That's about the only thing.
Was there any conversation between you and her at that time?
I think she directed me to the room where Chloe was located. It's a very small area, so it's obvious that I could see the officers were in there performing CPR on Chloe.
Did you remain in the household or did you proceed outside at that point?
I walked back outside waiting for the ambulance. I wanted to give Assistant Chief Binge was doing the CPR. And so this is kind of what we call a grab and go. As soon as the ambulance gets there, we'll carry the person out to the ambulance. Rather than getting the cot out and taking it into the house and loading the person up and then taking them out, it's much quicker just to grab them and go right directly to the ambulance. So I waited outside until I saw the ambulance coming down the street, and then I went in and hollered at Assistant Chief Binge and told him, ambulance is here, let's go.
Is there anything specific that makes it a grab and go or just?
It's just a small child, so it's obvious a very serious situation, and you just want to get them the medical treatment as fast as you can. So we just don't want to take extra time loading them up in a cot.
Once, it sounds like Corey Binge is the one who carried Chloe out.
Yes.
Once he carried her out, what do you recall next?
Well, he placed her in Chloe into the back of the ambulance. I was standing at the back, getting the doors shut, and while I was standing there, Aaron Thomas come running up to the back of the ambulance.
Did you know him before that day?
No, I did not.
What do you remember of Aaron Thomas when you saw him?
Our interaction at that point was he said something that he was the father. I'm not for sure if he's the father of Chloe or not, but he said something that indicated to me that he was the father. I assumed that he was the father of Chloe.
And what did he do after saying something like that?
We opened up the back doors of the ambulance, and he looked in, and then he just became upset, and then he turned and went into the house.
Did you follow him, or did you remain outside?
I remained outside.
What did you do after Aaron ran in?
Well, he was only in there a minute or so, and then he came right back out to the ambulance where I was at. I told him that I would give him a ride to the hospital. We were both thinking, I think at that time, that the ambulance was going to take off immediately. So we went down to my vehicle, which was parked about a half block away, and he got in my vehicle with me. We sat there for a minute. It seemed like a long time. He became more agitated. He was wanting to be with Chloe. So he got out of my vehicle and he went back to the ambulance.
Now, after you got out of your vehicle, what did you do next? Did you get out with him?
I went to my vehicle. He got in my vehicle for just a minute or so. Then he went back to the ambulance. I stayed in my vehicle. Just a minute or so later, Aaron and Kelsie and I was call a 2-year-old that she had, they all came to my vehicle. They got into my vehicle. Aaron was in the front passenger seat. Kelsie was in the back with a small child. So we sat there waiting for the ambulance to leave because they did not want to leave until the ambulance left. Again, it seemed like forever. So Aaron was becoming agitated again. Why aren't they going to the hospital? And I told him, go be with your baby. And so he got out and he ran to the ambulance. Just as he got to the back of the ambulance, he turned around and come running back to me because then the ambulance was pulling away. So then we followed the ambulance to the hospital.
While he left your vehicle, do you remember any observations of Kelsie and her son?
No, they're just sitting in the back of my vehicle.
Were they saying anything?
No.
Once Aaron returned to your vehicle, what did you do next?
We drove to the hospital. We followed the ambulance.
Was there any conversation between yourself, Aaron, and Kelsie?
Yes.
Could you describe it and who was talking?
Aaron just asked Kelsie, he said, I don't want to upset you, but what happened? And Kelsie said that they ate lunch, they took a nap. She went, and after the nap, she checked on Chloe, and she found Chloe hanging in the closet by a pair of pajamas.
Was there any questioning that you carried out, like an interrogation at that time?
Not at all. I purposely didn't say anything. That is the only thing that was said during that ride to the hospital.
How long did that ride take?
5 minutes.
How long did it feel?
A long time.
Now, once you arrived at the hospital, what did you do next?
We pulled up right behind the ambulance as they were getting Chloe out of the ambulance. So we watched them bring Chloe into the emergency room. We followed in behind her. They took Chloe into a trauma room. Aaron went into the trauma room with Chloe, and then I stood out in the hallway with Kelsie and the 2-year-old.
Is there anything that stuck out in particular about standing out with her at that time?
Kelsie was crying. At one point, she said she felt like she was going to be sick. And at one point, a nurse came out of the room and asked some questions.
Did you ask her any questions at that point?
No, I did not.
After that nurse came out and asked her some questions, did you hang around the scene much longer?
Yes.
What were you doing during that time period?
I was standing in the hallway with Kelsie, just waiting to see what was going to happen. Basically, we waited there until they pronounced Chloe dead.
Do you remember around what time that was?
No, I don't.
Once Chloe was pronounced dead, what did you do next?
Eventually, Aaron came out of the room, and Aaron and Kelsie, myself, and I believe there's a chaplain. We walked out of the emergency room, out a back door there, and there's kind of a bench there, and we just stood there for a while. The chaplain was talking to him. I didn't talk to him about anything, and Kelsie was crying. It was hot. We were right in the sun, and Aaron eventually said we need to get Kelsie out of the sun. So we went back into the hallway of the emergency room. Aaron went back to the room where Chloe was at, and Kelsie and the small child walked to the end of the hallway with the chaplain, and that's the last I saw of her.
Was there anything else that you did in this investigation at that time?
I spoke to Sergeant Leffler, who arrived at the ER, and I spoke to Lieutenant Farrington, who also came to the ER. They were in contact with the officers at the scene. But that's about it. I just talked to them about basically what everybody's doing, and then that was it.
Other than maybe a coordination role, was there anything else that you did?
No.
Did you do anything to arrange, I guess, possession of the vehicle that Aaron Thomas arrived on the scene in?
Yes, I did.
What did you do?
After Aaron had arrived, before I gave him a ride to the hospital, he handed me a key to a vehicle and pointed out a white vehicle there. He said, that's something to the effect of that's a borrowed car and somebody needs to take care of it. So I took the key and said, we'll take care of the car for you. We'll just get you to the hospital. So I gave that key to Officer Higgins and just told him to take care of the car, get it off the street, and make sure it was secure.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross?
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief McAndrew, when you arrived at the residence, Kelsie was in the living room. She was crying. She was holding a small child who now knows Phoenix. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There was nothing about her appearance that seemed out of the ordinary to you at that point?
She was crying and upset.
So something you'd expect in this circumstance?
If that was my child, I'd be upset, yes.
And as you transported the family to the hospital, you observed Kelsie was still crying on the way there. Is that correct?
At points, she did cry, not all the way there. No.
But you did notice, at least at some point, just in the travel from the residence to the hospital, she was crying.
Yes.
And being the chief, you don't have a recorder in your vehicle, and you don't wear a microphone, so there isn't going to be a recording of that conversation that you overheard Kelsie having with you. Is that right?
That's correct. That's why I didn't ask any questions or participate in any conversations.
When you got to the hospital, though, you did overhear Kelsie talk with medical personnel about what happened.
Yes.
And essentially what you overheard Kelsie tell Aaron in the back of the patrol vehicle is exactly what she had told medical personnel. Is that right?
Yes.
You also saw the family's reaction to getting the news that Chloe was pronounced deceased, right?
Yes.
And what you had observed is Kelsie walk outside, drop down to her knees, lean against a bench by the entrance, and was crying. Is that right?
That's correct.
And again, a response that you would expect in a situation like that.
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect?
Nothing further, Your Honor. This witness may be excused.
You may sit down and be excused and leave the courtroom if you choose to do so. State may call next witness.
Your Honor, the state would call Aaron Thomas.
Step forward, please. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is true and correct, so help you God?
Yes.
Have a seat in the witness chair. Go ahead, Ms. Hughes.
Thank you. Sir, can you please state and spell your first and last name?
Aaron Thomas, AARONTHOMAS,
Sir, how old are you?
29.
Where did you grow up?
Mostly here in Zelma.
What do you do? Do you work?
Yes.
What do you do for work?
I work at Plastipack. It's a bottling company.
And what do you do there?
I'm a technician. I work on machines that make the bottles.
How long have you worked there?
Almost 2 years.
And prior to that, where were you working?
Downtown furniture store.
How long have you lived here in Ottumwa?
Roughly 10 years.
And what brought you here to Ottumwa?
I moved here from Bloomfield after I graduated college.
At some point, did you meet Kelsie?
Yes.
And you eventually married Kelsie, correct?
Correct.
And her name is now Kelsie Thomas.
Yes.
When you first met Kelsie, or when did you first meet Kelsie?
I believe we met at the skate park. I used to go down there a lot and skate.
Did you know what year that was?
Oh, I want to say it was 2013, maybe.
And you said you met at the skate park.
Yeah.
And did you start dating shortly after meeting?
Yes.
When you met Kelsie, did she already have a child?
Yes.
And who was her child?
Chloe.
How long did you and Kelsie date before you got married?
I'd say maybe 8 months.
How old was Chloe when you met Kelsie?
Roughly a year and a half.
And did you know who Chloe's father was?
Yes.
And who was her biological father?
Stephen Chandler.
And was Stephen Chandler in Chloe's life or Kelsey's life?
No.
When did you and Kelsie get married?
2014, I think December.
Did you and Kelsie have any children of your own?
Yes.
And who is that?
Phoenix.
Phoenix Thomas?
Yes.
And how old is Phoenix today?
He's 4.
After you and Kelsie got married, did you live here in Ottumwa initially?
Yes.
For a period of time, did you move out of the state together?
Yes.
Where did you move?
Kansas City, Missouri.
How long approximately were you in Missouri?
I'd say about 8 months. I moved down there to take a job with Menards.
Did you then at some point move back to Ottumwa?
Yes.
And when you moved back to Ottumwa, where were you and Kelsie, Phoenix, and Chloe living?
We had gotten a house on James Street. Yeah.
And at this time, when you were on James Street, were you working?
Yes.
Where were you working?
I had transferred back to Menards here in town.
And was Kelsie working?
No.
At some point then, did Kelsie get a job?
Yeah.
And where was she working?
At Casey's.
Did Kelsie ever talk to you about Stephen Chandler, Chloe's father?
We talked about him a few times. He wasn't, like I said, he wasn't really in the picture at all.
In the period that you and Kelsie started dating and then got married, did Stephen Chandler ever come around?
He came around once. We allowed him to take Chloe for a Thanksgiving event, I believe, and he called us not more than 2 hours after and wanted us to come get her again. So I told her that was it. There was going to be no more of that.
When you and Kelsie first started dating, what was Kelsie and Chloe's relationship like?
It was great. When we first got together, they were normal mother and daughter. It was a very good relationship from what I could see.
And who's Kelsey's mom?
Callie.
And Callie didn't live here in Ottumwa when you guys did?
No.
When would you see Callie?
I'd say maybe once a month, maybe.
Generally on weekends?
Yes.
Would Kelsie talk to her mom?
Yes.
How often would she talk to her mom?
I'd say once or twice every couple weeks on the phone normally. If she was in town, I don't know, it'd be a hit and miss on if she saw her or not.
Now, on a regular basis, who would you guys help with you guys to watch the kids, to watch Phoenix and Chloe?
At the time, it would have been her grandma Jody.
And who's Grandma Jody?
Uh,
How is she related to Kelsie?
I don't recall.
She's part of Kelsey's family, though?
Yeah.
And so you would call her Grandma Jody?
Yes.
And that's what Chloe would call her as well?
Yes.
Where were you working, and you might have already answered this, back in July 2018? Is that still when you were at Menards?
No, July 2018, I was at Plastic Pack.
And what shift were you working back in 2018 in July specifically?
Third shift, night shift.
So when you would work the night shift, generally what hours would you work?
I'd go in about 6:30 p.m. to about 7:30 a.m.
So the day before Chloe's death, the July 18th leading into the 19th, did you work that evening?
Yes,
Into the early morning?
correct.
And approximately what time did you get home that morning on July 19th?
I'd say roughly about 7:30.
And what did you do that morning?
I had a normal routine after I work. I'd get home, get something to eat, kind of wind down, maybe watch some Netflix or something, and then go to sleep.
When you, that morning, when you went to sleep, was anybody awake?
Kelsie was awake, and I don't believe the kids were up yet.
What did you do then?
Like I said, I'd get something to eat. I laid in bed. I believe it was cereal I was eating. Ate in bed, watched Netflix on my phone, and then fell asleep.
So then at some point you did fall asleep.
Yeah.
Do you recall what time you woke up?
I'd say roughly about noon.
Did you have something that you had previously planned to do that day?
Yes, I had previous plans with a friend of mine to detail his car.
What was the name of that friend?
Gary Shunk.
And is that S-H-U-N-K, I believe?
Yes.
Sound about right?
Yeah.
And why were you going to detail Gary's car?
Just for some extra money.
Now, when you woke up, I think you indicated it was around noon.
Yeah.
When you woke up, who was home?
When I woke up, it was Kelsie, Chloe, and Phoenix.
And what was Kelsie like that day?
Normal from what I could see. I didn't really notice too much. I was still trying to wake up.
What did you do then?
I started to get ready to leave. Got my shoes on.
And where did you go somewhere then? Did you leave?
Yeah.
And when you left, was it just Kelsie, Chloe, and Phoenix at home?
Yes.
And where did you go?
I went to Gary's house first.
And where's Gary's house at?
Forgive me, I can't remember the street, but it's over by that high-rise nursing home off of Albee Road.
Approximately how far was Gary's house from your house at the time?
Oh, if I had to guess, I'd say 25 city blocks.
So just a few minutes driving.
Yeah, maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. And once you got to Gary's house, did you and Gary go anywhere?
Yes, we went to Walmart to get cleaning supplies for the car.
Then after Walmart, did you go back to Gary's house?
Yes.
And then what did you start doing?
I had a conversation with him. He said that he had to go to work later, and I said that was fine. I started to detail the car, and I said I would drop it off to him when I was done.
And what kind of car were you detailing for Gary?
It was a Buick Encore. I can't remember the year exactly,
Do you
but
remember what color it was?
white, or pearl white, I guess.
Did Gary stay or did he leave and go to work?
He stayed for a short period of time. I think maybe an hour. I know he had to be to work at like 2, so.
And what was your plan for that afternoon?
To detail the car and then go home and watch my kids.
And why were you going to go home and watch the kids?
Because she had to work.
And by she, do you mean Kelsie?
Yes, sorry.
How long would you say you worked on that car and started detailing it?
I'd say roughly 2 to 3 hours.
Now, were you also going to wash the outside of the car?
Yes.
And were you going to wash it, or were you going to take it somewhere?
I took it to the car wash on over by South Heavy.
And at around 3 p.m., were you at that car wash?
Yes.
And when you were there, what happened?
I got a very, I would say, nasty phone call from Kelsie asking me where I was at why I was taking so long.
Yeah. Do you know what time Kelsie was planning on leaving for work?
Normally, she likes to leave work about a half hour early, which wasn't a big deal, but when she called me, it wasn't even a half an hour before she had to be to work. So
Do you remember what time Kelsie was supposed to work that day?
I believe it was 4:30.
After that first phone call, or I'm sorry, when you got that first phone call, where were you at?
When I got the first phone call, I was at the car wash. I was just hanging up the hose.
Did you get a second phone call?
Yes.
And where were you at when you received that second phone call?
When I received the second phone call, I was at Five Corners by McDonald's.
So were you on your way back from the car wash?
Yes.
And where were you going to?
I was going to our home on James.
And that second call, was that from, who was that from?
Kelsie.
And what if anything did Kelsie say during that phone call?
From what I can recall, she was very upset. The only thing I remember hearing on that phone call was, Chloe's not breathing. And at that point, I threw the phone in the seat next to me and went as fast as I could home.
Did you then go home to your house on James?
Yes.
And when you arrived there, what did you observe?
When I went to turn on the street, there was about half a dozen squad cars, 2 fire trucks and an ambulance, loads of people.
I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Sorry. How long, if you can tell us or estimate, did it take from when you received that second phone call till you went and turned down your block and saw all of this?
Not very long. I'd say from when I received the second phone call until I got to my street, maybe 2 minutes, if that.
What did you do when you arrived at home?
I got as close as possible to the house that I could get with all the cars in the way. Hopped the neighbor's curb, left the car there, ran to the house. Well, as I was running to the house, they were bringing Chloe out to the ambulance, and I kind of paused. I didn't really know where to go. I sidestepped and went to the ambulance. They wouldn't let me in the ambulance, so I ran back to the house. When I got into the house, I saw Kelsie and Phoenix and maybe a few officers, maybe 2 or 3. When I got in there, I grabbed Kelsie by her arm and I asked her if she was okay. That was the only thing I said to her. And then I bolted out the door.
Where was Kelsie at when you saw her?
I believe she was between our living room and Phoenix's room at the time.
And where was Phoenix at?
In her arms, in Kelsey's arms.
How did you get to the hospital?
In a squad car, unmarked squad car.
And what did you do, if you remember, with Gary's truck?
I came after we got to the hospital, or after we were finished at the hospital, I had an officer take me back to Gary's vehicle and then drop it off at JBS, and then he took me back to get my car.
Aaron, were you home at all when Kelsie was found in her bedroom at all? I'm sorry, when Chloe was in her bedroom?
No.
You left the house sometime after noon that day, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't arrive until sometime after 3:22 when the police and paramedics were there?
Correct.
I have a moment. Were you with Kelsie at both the house and the hospital for a little bit? After you arrived, sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
And were you there when she spoke to officers at the hospital?
I believe I was.
And do you recall her demeanor, Kelsey's demeanor when she was speaking with them?
It was very odd to me. I didn't understand why she had the demeanor after she just had lost a child, so it didn't seem normal to me.
And at some point, you talked to the police about where you were that day and the events leading up to Chloe's death.
Correct.
Do you remember how many hours you talked to them?
Roughly 7 hours.
Thank you, I have nothing further.
Cross.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Thomas, back in July of 2018, who in this world would know Kelsie Thomas and Cloe Chandler the best in the world? Would that be you?
From my understanding, yes.
Okay. And early on in your testimony, you were asked about Kelsie as a mother to Chloe before Phoenix was born. Do you recall that question?
I do.
Isn't it your opinion that Kelsie was an awesome mom to Chloe throughout, even after Phoenix was born?
To my knowledge, she was a good mother, yes.
Okay, in fact, when I took your deposition back in October of last year, that's what you told me. You said Kelsie's relationship with Chloe was awesome and life was good. You recall telling me that?
Objection. Improper impeachment.
We can keep going through these procedures, Your Honor. We can do that.
The question, in fact, when I took your deposition, etc., the objection to that question is sustained. The jury will disregard the question.
Mr. Thomas, do you recall me taking your deposition back on October 25th, 2019?
I do.
Do you recall me asking you about Kelsie's relationship with Chloe?
I do.
And you recall how you responded when I asked you that question?
Yes.
How do you believe you responded?
I believe that I responded with, they had a good relationship. Yeah. That was.
And at no time did you ever qualify your statement to me saying that it was better before Phoenix was born as opposed to after Phoenix was born, correct?
Correct.
Did you actually believe that? Did you actually believe that that Kelsie treated Chloe better before Phoenix was born?
No, I don't. No, I don't believe that was a. She treated both kids the same from my perspective.
Okay. Chloe was your stepchild, correct?
Correct.
When you grew up, you grew up a stepchild, correct?
For a period of time.
Okay. Do you recall having a conversation with me in your deposition about that dynamic and how you wanted to make sure that Chloe was not treated like a stepchild?
Objection. Improper impeachment.
Sustained.
Do you recall that conversation? Mr.
Objection.
Thomas?
Sustained.
Improper.
Sustained.
Yeah, I do.
So when I sustain an objection, that means you don't respond.
Okay.
Jury will disregard the response.
Mr. Thomas, did you become aware after Chloe's death of any sort of suspicion that Kelsie did not treat Chloe as well as Phoenix? Were you made aware of that?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Do you recall what Chloe played with as a child?
She had a few toys, couple Barbies, miscellaneous toys. I can't recall exactly what.
Okay. Did Chloe play all with her own exclusive toys and Phoenix had all his own exclusive toys, or did they share toys?
They shared toys.
Okay. If somebody were to assert to you that Phoenix got a lot of toys and Chloe did not, would that square with your recollection?
Objection.
Sustained, speculation.
Was Chloe adequately fed and clothed?
Yes,
And part of that was your responsibility too as well, correct?
correct.
Did she have less than Phoenix?
No,
Did you treat Chloe any differently than you treated Phoenix?
I have not.
Did you observe Kelsie to treat Chloe any different than Phoenix?
No,
At any point in your relationship with Kelsie Thomas, did you ever see Kelsie abuse Chloe in any way?
I did not.
Now, do you know who Callie Cookett is?
Yes,
And who is Callie?
Kelsey's mother.
Okay. How involved was Callie in Kelsey's life?
Very minimal.
Okay. And what do you mean by that?
I mean, not as often as I would say a mother should be, I guess.
Okay. Did you consider Callie to be involved in Kelsey's life at all?
Like I said, very minimal involvement.
Okay. When was the first time you recall seeing Callie after Chloe's death?
We saw Callie at Kelsey's grandmother's house. I don't recall the time.
Okay. Were you aware of any information that Callie had about how Chloe died at that point?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
It's fine. What was the first thing you recall Callie doing when she first saw you and Kelsie?
She confronted Kelsie about what had happened.
Okay. She was accusing Kelsie of being responsible?
Yes.
And that was as soon as you saw Callie for the first time after Chloe died, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any reason, or do you have any knowledge about why she had that suspicion?
No.
Do you know who Brittany Johnson is?
Yes.
And who is Brittany Johnson?
Kelsey's cousin, I believe.
How involved was Brittany Johnson in your and Kelsey's life?
Maybe once or twice a year on holidays.
Okay. And when we talk about these family holidays, are we talking about like weekend-long get-togethers or just kind of in passing?
A few hours at most.
Okay. And how many people would be at these family gatherings?
Less than a dozen.
Okay. Would you have a whole lot of interaction with people that were present at those family gatherings for a couple of hours?
Would I?
Would you or Kelsie or anybody have substantial interactions at those holidays?
I mean, I would say normal interaction. I wouldn't say extension. Yeah.
Okay. Did it appear to you in your relationship with Kelsie that she was close with her mother, Callie, or anybody on Callie's side of the family?
I wouldn't say they were. They were close, but not that close.
Okay. Not that close in the ways that you've just described to the jury? As far as some holiday visits?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe, as you testified earlier, probably not as much as you would have expected, given that Callie was mom?
Correct.
Back on July 19th of 2018, did you notice anything weird going on that day, or was that just a routine day?
For me, it was a routine day.
Okay. And as far as Kelsie being home with the kids, napping with the kids before she goes to work, was that unusual, or is that part of a routine?
It's very normal.
And you didn't have any sense that Kelsie was frustrated that day, or there were no red flags for you? You still went and detailed that car, correct?
Correct.
Now, the first phone call that you received from Kelsie, did she mention anything about Chloe?
No.
Okay, at that point, when you received that first phone call, you had no idea that there was something going on with Chloe, correct?
No, I didn't.
And if the record shows about 10 minutes later that you received that second phone call, you wouldn't have any reason to dispute that?
Correct.
Does that square with your recollection that you would have gotten that second phone call about 10 minutes later?
Roughly, yeah.
Okay. And when you received that call, that's when she had mentioned something about Chloe being in trouble, and you got panicked and hurried home, correct?
Correct.
Now, you said that a moment ago, at what point did you feel that Kelsie's demeanor seemed odd to you? Was that throughout all of this, or at the hospital, or afterward, or when?
I first noticed it at the hospital. I didn't notice it any time before because I was in a very emotional state.
Okay, and I believe you said that you were also interviewed by police for about 7 hours, correct?
Correct.
You never raised any concerns about Kelsie's demeanor ever before, have you?
No.
Including in my deposition a couple months ago when you and I spoke?
Correct.
In fact, up until you were told by police that Kelsie had confessed, you were her staunchest supporter, were you not?
I was.
Okay. At any time, before, during, or after all these events, did Kelsie ever confess to you or make any admissions that she was responsible for Chloe's death or for hurting Chloe?
Objection.
Basis?
Your Honor, goes beyond the scope, and also only the state can enter in the defendant's statement. The defense cannot enter in the defendant's own statement.
Abstain.
Mr. Thomas, I'm not going to ask you what Kelsie told you, but at one point, and probably more than one point, Kelsie told you what she said she saw, correct?
Correct.
Did Kelsie's version of events always remain consistent with you?
Yes.
Now, as far as how that day laid out at home, again, that was just all part of the normal routine, correct?
Yes.
And the possibility that Chloe was climbing on something and accidentally hung herself also made sense to you, given that she'd been climbing for a few months before that?
Objection calls for speculation.
Objection overruled. Witness can answer.
At the time, it seemed possible.
Okay, in fact, in your deposition, you told me all that made sense to you at the time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Are you and Kelsie still married?
Legally.
Okay. Shortly after police told you that Kelsie confessed, you stopped having contact with her, isn't that true?
Correct.
You went to Arizona with a different female and your son?
Objection relevance.
Sustained.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Just briefly, Your Honor. Erin, I know you indicated that back at this time you were working nights, correct?
Yes.
And what shift was Kelsie working?
Would have been second shift, which is roughly 4 to 11.
And I think you indicated that obviously you would each watch the kids when the other one wasn't working.
Correct.
Or I know Grandma Jody was helping out a lot back then.
Yes.
And on this day, on July 19th, 2018, when you went to sleep that morning after, I know you said you watched Netflix and maybe ate something, until you woke up at noon, were you aware that Kelsie had left Chloe home alone with you?
I was not aware of that.
Do you recall Kelsie waking you up to tell you that?
No, I don't.
And Kelsie back then would often take her father on doctor's appointments
Yes.
during the day.
Yeah.
But you don't recall that day her waking you up or telling you she was going to have Chloe stay with you?
I don't recall that now.
Nothing further.
Recross.
Mr. Thomas, do you recall communicating with Grandma Jody on the day of Chloe's death?
No, I don't.
Okay. So there wouldn't have been a time where you were hoping that she could watch the kids because you're still detailing the car?
I don't recall that at all.
Okay. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
You may step down. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may also be excused and leave the courtroom if you choose to do so. Members of the jury, we're about to take a break, but first I want to ask the state, do we have further witnesses available today?
We do not, Your Honor.
Okay. So if, my understanding is that we are out of witnesses for today, that there's no further evidence available today, and that the jury should be excused for the evening?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So members of the jury, let me just remind you during this overnight break that you need to keep an open mind. You've not yet heard all the evidence. Don't talk to anyone about this case, even friend, spouse, family member, whoever it might be. Do not talk about this case. Pay no attention to any media accounts. Do no investigation of the scene of the occurrence. We will see you back. Please be back in the jury room at 10 of 9 by the clock on the wall tomorrow. Enjoy your evening.